Welcome to Strictly Business, Variety's weekly podcast featuring conversations with industry leaders about the business of media and entertainment. I'm Cynthia Littleton, co-editor-in-chief of Variety. On today's episode, my guest is Matt Strauss, chairman of NBCUniversal Media Group. Strauss is a 22-year veteran of Comcast and NBCUniversal. In our conversation, Strauss weighs in on how Peacock got to the magic mark of profitability in Q2 and how they intend to grow it from there. He breaks down the recent bundling pact that Peacock struck with YouTube to be included as part of the YouTube Premium package, which he promises will bring many millions of subscribers to Peacock when the deal kicks in next year. Strauss also gives a lot of insight into how NBCUniversal is looking to build out the Peacock platform in a kind of membership system that can bring consumers perks and easy access to everything NBCUniversal has to offer, from theme parks to deals with big NBCUniversal ad clients and much more. Strauss emphasizes that the recent moves around Peacock as well as rival streamers represent the next wave of growth for the platforms that most major media firms have poured billions of dollars into building over the past decade. Strauss goes deep on how new deal structures are emerging in streaming, and as a veteran cable hand, he does note that there is some irony in that a lot of the problems that people are trying to solve with streaming platforms these days were very neatly handled about 15 years ago under the old cable bundle, but time marches on. This is a good listen for anybody doing business with NBCUniversal because Strauss shares quite a bit about how they're thinking about their approach to the marketplace as NBCUniversal gets ready for yet another big transaction to take effect next year when NBCUniversal and Sky separate from the Comcast cable mothership. Matt Strauss, chairman of NBCUniversal Media Group. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, how are you, Cynthia? Thanks for having me.
I appreciate the chance to talk because, of course, the big news coming out of Comcast's Q2 numbers last month was the big milestone for Peacock, the streaming platform that you oversee. On the business side, it hit the magical P word of profitability. Matt, what were the drivers that led you to that important benchmark in this past quarter?
So we were very proud of the earnings for the media group. It was a real milestone for us, both to get to profitability in Q2, but also we added 2 million subscribers to Peacock, which is the second quarter in a row that we've added 2 million subscribers. And so we're now reporting at 48 million domestic subscribers. And we've also had a pretty magical summer. I mean, you've got Love Island, which was the number one show across all streaming for the summer. We had the World Cup, as you know, which we were broadcasting and streaming in Telemundo and Peacock, which was the most watched Spanish soccer match in history. We also had our best premiere for Peacock Original with 5-Star Weekend. The other milestone for Peacock, which you may know, is that last month we had our 6-year anniversary. And so Peacock launched in July of 2020. And I think what's worth noting is if you actually go back, and it wasn't that long ago, although it feels like dog years, the streaming market was very, very different back in 2020 than it is today. And I would say the focus of many media companies was to look at building streaming services that were oriented around scripted dramas and binge viewing and ad-free. And there was even things where people were speculating that linear television is dead and sports doesn't necessarily have a place in streaming, and a lot of speculation and hyperbole.
Will ever make a live TV appointment on a streaming platform will never happen, said somebody back in 2019.
We were always very clear from the beginning that we saw a white space in the streaming market. And I don't know if that's partially because part of my DNA comes from Comcast Cable. I like to think of myself as a student of the business and how pay television worked and the history of how pay television got to where it did, as well as the growth of cord cutting and streaming. We are a broad-based broadcast network, which means that we try to reach a broad household demographic, although we also want to have something for each individual in the home, which means that you have to think broader than scripted dramas. You have to think about unscripted programming and news programming and sports and movies. And so we had a very important aperture around having a broad-based streaming service, which really becomes an extension of what we do as NBC. we are a dual revenue stream business. We both license our content and we have an amazing ad sales team under Mark Marshall. Well, two revenue streams typically is better than one when it comes to any business. And it made sense to us that if streaming was going to continue to evolve and more eyeballs were going to migrate to streaming, that the advertisers were going to migrate there as well. And so it was very important that we anchored ourselves as a ad-supported service from day one.
To your point about the business being very different in 2020, there was a lot of like, why are you doing that back then, for sure?
Yeah, there was a lot of head scratching. Like, wait, why are you not doing what everyone else is doing? And again, I think it speaks to playing to your strengths, looking for the white space, because there's always white space in every market. And also, I guess, having the resilience to have a longer term view. The other longer term view that we had was that live programming, especially sports, was going to be critical to streaming for several reasons. One was the biggest challenge that we believed streaming was going to have was habituation. Like, how do you get somebody to open up your app every single day? Binge viewing is the opposite of urgency. Binge viewing is telling the viewer it's there when you want it. And so there's no urgency to it. What you really want, especially if you're an ad-supported service, is you want to give people a reason to open up your app every single day. You want to drive what I would call as habituation. And then the more times they go into your experience, the more at-bats you have, so to speak, to try to get them into other types of programming. And so making bets around sports and live programming was very, very critical to our strategy from day one. And that's what led us to do deals from, at the time, from the WWE to the Premier League, to the Big Ten, to the NBA and others, where now we've amassed one of the largest sports libraries of rights. We probably have more sports hours available than any streaming service. And there's something live on Peacock now every single day. And so when you take a look at that approach, like, we've been very consistent with that vision and that strategy. I used to say things like, look, this streaming is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And I revised that. It's a marathon at a sprinter's pace because things are moving quickly and we need to obviously adapt and move quickly as well. But our strategy has been very consistent. And in many ways, we never viewed streaming as a standalone business. We just saw it as a derivative of the broadcast business. This is an opportunity for us to just take NBC into the next evolution of where the market was going and to manage it really as a portfolio. And so I think maybe what we could have done better is maybe articulate that we're not necessarily doing what other media companies are doing. We're not evaluating ourselves just based on subscriber metrics or when do we get to profitability. Like, we are looking at engagement, at churn, at how are we monetizing every subscriber. What's the ARPU of that subscriber? Things that take longer holistically to build, but with the belief that this is ultimately where we need to go as a company. And I think that manifested itself in what we shared at our last earnings. So it was kind of 6 years in the making for us to get to the 48 million subscribers and the profitability. But what I'm equally proud of is if you look at the revenue per subscriber, we're generating, in some cases, as much revenue than other companies are generating who have significantly more subscribers than us.
Let me just ask you very directly, is ARPU versus ARPU, is your ARPU comparable or even greater than a Netflix or an HBO Max?
I would say that we're very competitive. And in some cases, we're higher. There's a couple of factors for it. One is 80% of our subscribers are on the ad tier. And that, again, has a lot to do with what I just shared, which is, we started with Peacock as an ad-supported service. When we didn't pivot and change course, we've just continued to build and execute. And so as a result, we've got both subscription revenue and we have advertising revenue, which accumulates towards what you would define as ARPU.
And counterintuitively, the lower price subscription base for the ad-supported with the ad revenue actually brings more ARPU than the paying the full freight, no ad subscription price.
We charge $10.99 a month for the ad tier of Peacock, which we call Peacock Premium. And then Premium Plus, which is ad-free, is $16.99. And so you can kind of identify what the gap is as generally the type of advertising that you'd be looking to generate as a kind of a rule of thumb. And so the other thing that I think is different about the way we went to market is because we were very focused on building a healthy subscriber base, healthy ARPU, we really resisted doing bundling. And so the majority of Peacock subscribers up until about a year ago were really what I would say are direct billed subscribers. These are subscribers that signed up for Peacock through our website or through our app or our channel on other platforms. And those tend to be subscribers that have higher engagement, higher ARPU. And so we resisted the urge to just augment our subscriber base by going after bundling until we felt we had taken maximum share of wallet out of the market to really identify those subscribers that we really believed would be willing to pay for Peacock directly and look at bundling more as the second phase of our growth around what could drive incrementality. Doing bundling deals to get the right economics where you want to make sure that it's both incremental growth. And if you do cannibalize full paying subs, you want to make sure you're more than offsetting that by driving significantly higher new subscribers. And so there's a calculus to how you do it that we were very cautious about. But we always knew that that was going to be the next wave of growth for Peacock.
Matt, obviously you've done a very big bundling deal with YouTube Premium. How does it work? If you pay full freight for YouTube Premium, will you get all of Peacock?
Well, so let me unpack it for you. But I think it's maybe helpful just to kind of frame our perspective on bundling because, and again, this may come back to my cable roots at Comcast. But if you go back to actually 2019, I remember doing an interview, and this was kind of at the height of cord cutting and people were subscribing to streaming services. And I was trying to draw a parallel to the cable business. And I said, streaming is actually going to look a lot more like cable in the future. And what consumers are going to realize is that one streaming service is not going to give you enough video calories because people on average consume 5 to 6 hours of video a day. And so you're likely going to find that people are subscribing to multiple streaming services in the future. The cost of content and sports rights are not likely going to decline, which means that streamers are going to have to take their retail prices higher. That is likely going to create a dynamic in the market where bundling is going to start to form. And the value proposition to the consumer is the more you take, the better the price. That is essentially how the cable industry got started. And there's no reason to think that streaming wouldn't follow suit. Another reason why we wanted to place all those bets around aggregating sports, because if the market did move to bundling, we wanted to ensure we got the right economics. And so that's what led us to some of the decisions that we made and how we staged the growth of Peacock. Fortunately, I think that we were directionally right. The market is arguably now in its moment where direct-to-consumer is still very relevant, and it's certainly a big part of our strategy. But the next wave of growth is going to come from bundling. I think the YouTube deal in many ways is representative of we are now at that moment of the great rebundling. And we've done bundles in the past very surgically. We did a deal with Apple with a bundle. We did a deal with Walmart for a bundle. We experiment with channels where you can get Peacock Premium Plus on channels. The YouTube deal in many ways was very transformative, but it checked a lot of boxes. The one box that it checked is that, the audience on Peacock is a very different demographic than the audience that is generally on YouTube. And YouTube Premium, it skews younger, and it's primarily people who are subscribing to get access to ad-free YouTube, the ability to download YouTube programming, and also access to a really robust catalog of music. And so not necessarily the audience that currently has Peacock. And so when we evaluate these kinds of deals, what you're really looking for is incrementality. Is this going to drive incremental subs or not? And we feel very confident that this deal is going to drive many millions of incremental subscribers for Peacock and likely is going to make Peacock one of the largest domestic streamers as a result of this deal. And so while it's a bundle where you're going to get YouTube Premium and Peacock, existing YouTube Premium subscribers in the United States will also now have access to Peacock as well. And so they're kind of grandfathering, in a way, existing YouTube Premium subscribers in the US to now get access and entitled to Peacock. And so that's going to drive a tremendous amount of growth for us, but it's also going to drive a tremendous amount of value to YouTube. And we've structured the deal in a way where the economics make sense for us.
How are you going to account for these subscribers? Will basically anybody that gets YouTube Premium will have access to Peacock?
We're going to pick up many millions of new subscribers to Peacock, which is very typical of any bundling deal. There's an economic wholesale arrangement per subscriber per month. And so for us, these are Peacock subscribers. They will be entitled to the full Peacock service. They will have the ability to consume Peacock through YouTube channels. We also plan to also in the future allow them to access Peacock through the app.
In terms of the business relationship between Peacock and YouTube, is it basically the old cable model where Cox Cable paid USA Network a certain number of cents per sub for the right to carry the service?
It's a bit more nuanced. And I can't get into the exact specifics of how the deal works, but I think directionally speaking, on YouTube as an example, you today can sign up for Peacock on YouTube and you can either get the ad-free version of Peacock, but later this month or next month, we're also going to be launching the ad version of Peacock. Also, with this new bundle, which will launch next year, you'll be able to get access and entitled to Peacock if you subscribe to the bundle. Right. And so it's just a different way for you to get access to it. And so if somebody signs up for Peacock standalone, typically that's a rev share model. If somebody signs up for Peacock through the bundle, it's typically a wholesale model where we're getting paid a monthly wholesale fee per subscriber for everybody who signs up for the bundle. What's also though important about this, Cynthia, is it also gets us more deeply aligned with YouTube on the advertising. We still sell all the advertising on Peacock. We've come up with a deal framework that almost makes us indifferent to whether we're monetizing the advertising in our app versus we're monetizing the advertising in a channel. That is a huge shift from how things have worked in the past, where we've been able to come up with a dynamic with YouTube where we could still charge the same CPMs, still have the same types of ad innovation and targeting capabilities, where we can monetize the engagement on YouTube in a manner that almost makes us indifferent to where the consumer is accessing the Peacock service. And so that really allows us to lean heavily into kind of a content first, platform second approach, which has always been our vision, which is to get to a place where you start with the consumer and what is the best experience for the consumer. And we want to give the consumer option. We were able to come up with a structure with YouTube that we feel really good about that will allow us to monetize our advertising inventory in a very healthy way and still maintain the premiumness of what we do with Peacock.
Peacock has been largely domestic. Would you say that these types of bundling deals are what you're looking at to expand its international distribution?
We're still very committed to direct to consumer. And we're now in that phase of what I'm describing as the great rebundling. And so I do think the other elegance of this deal is it doesn't change any of the partnerships we put in place already, and it doesn't preclude us from forging new partnerships going forward. And so I do think you'll see us continue to lean into doing more partnerships. But what I'm really excited about is how this could transform our engagement, continue to drive engagement. If there's one thing that's really going to define the streaming wars, so to speak, it's not subscribers as much as it's engagement. And I think this partnership is going to continue to help drive engagement of Peacock as we're looking to chart out the next wave of growth for our business.
In the second quarter that was just reported, what drove those 2 million subscriber gains? Was it Olympics? Was it Love Island? Was it anticipation for the World Cup?
The majority of it was directly related to Love Island, the success of Love Island. It was the World Cup, which the Telemundo team and Cesar Conde and team, they just did an unbelievable job and it exceeded all of our expectations. The only benchmark we had was, we had the 2022 World Cup, which was available on Telemundo and Peacock. And that was at a time where there really wasn't a destination for streaming the English language World Cup. And so we were expecting that this year we would likely have a great result, but not as well as we performed in 2022. And this year, we far outpaced 2022. I think, again, that just speaks to the execution.
Is it as simple as you have a more streamlined focus, NBC, Peacock, Bravo? Or is it something about disconnecting from linear cable?
First, we are still very big believers in pay television. Pay television is a big part of our revenue. I think that, ironically, a lot of the challenges that consumers have today with streaming, I would argue were solved with pay television. When you talk about the ultimate bundle, no fragmentation, having everything aggregated in one place, you're really pining for what had solved a lot of those consumer touch points, which was pay television. And so we are still very big believers in pay television. I think to answer your question, though, I think it's accomplished a few things. It's provided us more focus. The assets that are part of NBC Universal that remained with NBC Universal were handpicked for a reason. NBC, Bravo, Peacock, NBC Sports, NBC News, Telemundo. These assets work better together. When I talk about sports, we don't approach sports just through the lens of Peacock. We approach the sports through the lens of broadcast and Peacock, or in the case of the World Cup, Telemundo and Peacock. And so having us manage with assets that are very complementary to each other, I think allows us to streamline decision making. And it also provides clarity around goals and priorities. I think the other piece, and this is something that has been done in partnership with Donna Langley and myself, is we also restructured the business as a result of this. And so one of the big opportunities was, instead of managing the business in what I would call, for lack of a better phrase, silos, we said, let's break down the silos. And so instead of having a marketing department for Peacock and a marketing department for NBC, or a programming department for Peacock and a programming department for NBC, or different teams that are doing distribution agreements, or different teams that are looking at research and decision sciences, what if we streamline this into what I like to call centers of excellence? One programming team, one marketing team, one distribution and partnership team, one product and technology team. Let's have these teams manage as centers of excellence across the portfolio. And then let's incent everybody towards getting maximum reach, maximum engagement, and drive maximum bottom line cash flow.
The Versant Media was a big transaction that took a lot of energy in 2025. It became official at the start of this year. Now, also big news for Comcast is a decision to split up the core of the cable operations from NBCUniversal and the Sky business in Europe. That has been well articulated by Brian Roberts and Mike Cavanaugh. From where you sit, Matt, how do you think that the separation from Comcast, from the assets that you used to help run?
I have been at the company over 20 years. And so for me personally, it's bittersweet because I've spent so much of my career at Comcast Cable. And obviously I've spent, several years now here at NBC, but putting that aside, it was the absolute right business decision. Having Mike Cavanaugh, who in many ways is the architect with Brian Roberts of this new structure, it's really going to be about speed, velocity, and focus. That's the way I would describe it. And so it's very energizing to know that we're going to have, again, a tighter portfolio of assets that are going to position us for growth. I think it's going to allow us to make more streamlined decision making. I think having Mike Cavanaugh be the CEO of NBC, also just to have his strategic, kind of leadership, is also going to allow us to continue to accelerate our growth. And I think we're going to be able to be more opportunistic. And the same thing on the cable side. I mean, I've worked for years with Mike Angelakis, who is a best-in-class operator. And I think now Comcast Cable is also set up for success, where they have the ability to kind of streamline their portfolio and identify new growth opportunities. And they are going to have a path to kind of chart what they believe is the next course for their growth. And so I think it's a win-win for both sides of the company. But I think this is a relatively easy decision. I think it's now just going to be about the execution.
Are you a little nervous, though, because you will, after this separation, your quarterly earnings will rise and fall on how well Peacock did and how well the movies did? Sometimes those more pure content companies can see a lot of volatility in the stock. If the movie doesn't open, the stock on Monday typically goes down.
There's no question being part of a diversified company, allows you to offset any misses in other parts of the business. And so what you're really describing is removing, let's just say, like a safety net. I would say the general sentiment, though, of people at NBCUniversal is confidence. We have a tremendous degree of confidence in our movie studio. And again, I'm obviously going to be a bit biased here, but I really believe this. I think we have the best in class operators, whether it's Donna Langley or Mark Woodbury or Cesar Conde or Dana Strong. Like, you've got people who understand the business. They are best in class. They are managing world-class, businesses. And so to your question, while there is kind of the removal of that safety net, I think the general perspective is we're ready for that.
What are you all cooking up to enhance that, to just make your content stickier?
We set out on this journey several years ago to start thinking of streaming more as an entertainment platform, more as a participatory entertainment platform. And that's what led us to launch vertical video several years ago, because so much of the consumption we saw was happening on mobile, and people were swiping and navigating with their forefinger and their thumb. And so to be able to offer live sports in vertical video, or even original micro dramas in vertical video, which we launched, you now have that fully embedded into our platform. We started partnering around gaming, but not just any game, like gaming that is derivative of fandoms that are on our platform. So for example, we have rights to Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. You could play right on our platform. We launched that. Or Law and Order is a huge fandom. Well, we partnered with Wolf Games, who've created Law and Order derivative games that you could play right on our platform. Or podcasting. We have a show called The Traders, and well, why not have a podcast around talking about the traders? And so our strategy has been very much focused on super serve the fandoms, expand the concentric circles to offer them more ways to engage. The best place to consume our content should be on our platform. The other thing that we look very closely at is, well, one way to drive retention is to also start thinking of Peacock, not just as a service that you pay and you get video, but what are there other benefits and perks that you get? And the subscription service starts to feel more like a membership. And so we are going to be testing a membership platform for Peacock as well. And there'll be different memberships depending on your tenure on Peacock and also how much you engage on Peacock. But you essentially will get and earn rewards.
Like loyalty points, kind of.
Exactly. And so the rewards could be everything from 25% discount at the NBC store to buy merch to if you engage a certain amount, you can buy one, get one free Pizza Hut pizza. It could, we're going to be launching a partnership with Instacart where Peacock subscribers as part of membership will get access to Instacart Plus for free for a year. And so, and our ad sales team are also working very closely with prospective partners around other benefits and values. And so again, starting to evolve from thinking of this as streaming to entertainment, from subscription to membership. Again, we're always charting out what we see as the next white space. This is where we see, at least for NBCUniversal, the next wave of growth for streaming and the broader business as we're continuing to build out where we see the big opportunity.
Matt, I have really enjoyed talking about the evolution of streaming and the growth of Peacock.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice. We love to hear from listeners. Please go to Variety.com to sign up for the free weekly Strictly Business newsletter. And don't forget to tune in next week for another episode of Strictly Business.